Harsh lighting is something that as landscape photographers we try to avoid doing. Today I'm going to give you some pro tips on photographing in the harsh light and how to deal with it to get the best photos possible. The harsh light between say 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon on most days, we don't want to be out there photographing. But sometimes you can get caught and have to photograph in that harsh light, especially if you're on holidays traveling with your family. So this is what we talk about, just harsh lighting. You can see very harsh light. Most of the time, as landscape photographers, we try to photograph the early morning light, the late afternoon light, but what happens if you have to photograph in harsh light? How do you cope with that? Do you just put your hands up and say, I give up? I'm not going to even try to photograph because I know the lighting is harsh. Well, the reality is that if you're traveling with a family or if you're traveling with a group overseas, you're going to be caught having to photograph in harsh light. In this video, I'm going to show you how I deal with photographing in harsh light because I travel with my family a lot through Australia, and also when we go to Thailand, I'm stuck with having to photograph in some very unforgiving light. And I've learned that you have to come up with a way of taking a photo and looking at it and saying, okay, I've taken this photo, the lighting is bad, but I'm going to try to get the best that I can. Sometimes it fails. Most of the time though, I come up with a plan and say, this is what I'm going to do. It mightn't be the best photos that I can get if I'd photographed in early morning or late afternoon, but there's still going to be photos that I'm going to be proud to put my name on. So let's take a look at this first set of photos here. This was taken around 11 years ago at Cape Byron. On the left, the lighting was very harsh. At zero exposure compensation, the image is blown out. I reduced it by -0.1 on exposure compensation, but I'm very happy with how this image has turned out. Now, sometimes you have to face the setting sun. There's an image that you want and you go like, well, sunset's coming. I really would like a picture here. And I set myself behind the tree so that the tree would take the brunt of that very bright sun as it was setting. This is the edited image. I've reduced the exposure a bit in Lightroom. I've brought the highlights down. I've increased the shadows a bit. And this image shows you that even on a bright day like this, with no clouds, at sunrise or at sunset, you can still get a very good image. You just have to think outside the box. Look for something. If there's a jetty there at sunrise, try to place the sun behind the jetty or behind one of the big pylons, so it takes most of the strength of the sun away, and you'll find you're going to get a very good photo. Now, about 6-7 years ago, we traveled down to Stanthorpe with my in-laws. We did the winery tour and we came across these railway tracks to go into a winery, and I really liked the scene. So I stopped and I took a photo. The photo looks very nice, but it's very plain. The sky is just blue. The trees have just got a little bit of green on it, but the foreground is just grey. So what did I do? I just turned it into a black and white image. Now it looks like an olden day photo. It has some feel to it. I've taken all the colour out of the image instead of just having half the image in colour, which really doesn't look that good. Now the whole image is black and white and it looks a very nice image. Now this was taken only about a week and a bit ago when we went to Tasmania with my family and we stopped at Nelson's Falls, and on the way back from Nelson's Falls towards the car park I noticed these trees. I've added this photo into my previous video, how to use exposure compensation correctly, and I'll put a link to that video here. And these trees really captured my imagination. The light was very harsh. There was some moss growing on the trees, and I thought like, it's going to look a dull image because it's around 11 AM. So what am I going to do? I'm going to increase the exposure compensation by 2 stops. And this is the image that I took. Now look at the image on the right. You will see the glow that I've been able to get because I've increased the exposure by 2 stops. So I've blown out the highlights, but it gives a glowing effect around all that moss. Think about what you want in the photo. Here, I had a plan. I looked at it and go, yep, I know what I'm going to do. Sometimes you either have to increase the exposure or decrease the exposure to get the shot that you want. It's your choice. You're the photographer. It's your photo. Think about what you want in that photo, not what somebody else would decide. Now this image was taken about 10 years ago while traveling with my family on a small island off the coast of Thailand. In the summertime, the skies are very hazy. There's a lot of pollution in the sky, so this is a sort of sky that you have to deal with, not blue skies like we have here, and it's very hard to get good photos in this sort of weather. But I really like these statues here, so I framed the image up and I did the best that I could. Back then, software wasn't that good. I wasn't really happy with the image, so I never shared it on social media. But now with Adobe Lightroom being so good, I went back and I took a second look at this image, and this is the image that I was able to get. It's still a vast improvement from the first photo, but because of the haze in the sky, I was still very limited in what I could do. I didn't want to render the photo unnatural. I've left as natural as I can, and this shows you the power of Adobe Lightroom in this day and age. A few years ago, we went to Cairns, and it was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We just stopped for lunch, and there was like a bush track just behind the restaurant, and we were just walking along, and I noticed these little plants just growing on some moss, and they looked very nice. Everything is just blown out. This was at 0 exposure compensation. So what did I do? I reduced the exposure by 2 stops. Now look at the image. It looks much better. The background is all black. And what do we see? We just see the plants and that moss. But there's a little bit of that sort of white area where the moss isn't growing, and it's blown out. So I exported the image from Lightroom to Photoshop and just cloned out that very bright area. Brought it back into Lightroom and just touched it up a bit, added a bit of saturation. It looks so much different from the first photo, doesn't it? Sure, it's just a plant, but it's still a very nice photo. I like photographing anything that I see that captures me. Sometimes the small things can really make a great photo. Now here's another one at sunset. The sun was setting behind us, but look at the sky. It's just bland. I didn't blow out the highlights. It looks like the highlights are blown. This is the edited image of that photo. It looks pretty good, doesn't it? Now take a look at this image here. And I took 3 photos. The first photo was 1 stop underexposed. The second photo is correctly exposed. The third photo is 1 stop overexposed. And I blended them in Photomatix. It looks so much better compared to just a single image. The single image is still fine, but some people think that in this day and age, HDR, high dynamic range photography, or bracketed photography, like you're taking multiple images, is out of date. I use a Nikon Z6 II, and sometimes I still find that I have to bracket my shots. And especially when I went to Tasmania just a week and a half ago, I had to bracket some of my images because when we were traveling, I got to some places where I just had to bracket the photos to get the photo that I wanted. So on the second last day of our trip around Tasmania, my wife looked on the map and she said, you know, there's a waterfall not far from here. It was around 2:30 in the afternoon. I said, you know, the light's going to be very harsh. She said, well, we've got time. Let's just go and take a look at it. It was a very nice waterfall. Look at this image. This is 0 exposure compensation. The shadows are quite nicely lifted, but look just to the left of the waterfall. All that rock is overexposed. There's no way I could reduce the exposure in that. All I could do was either settle for this image or take a photo that is exposed for the highlights, which is this photo here. This photo was exposed for the highlights. But now my problem is the shadows are very dark. What I could do is increase the shadows. But look at it, there's no detail. It was so dark to bring up the shadows, all it does, it looks like mud. So I took a set of 4 images bracketed so that I could later turn it into a high dynamic range composite image. So the first image is 2 stop underexposed. The second image, 1 stop underexposed. The third image, no exposure compensation. The fourth image, just 1 stop overexposed. On my Nikon Z6 II and on most Nikons, you can't set for 4. I end up taking 5 photos in this set, but the 5th photo, which was 2 stops overexposed, I didn't need. Here is the resulting image. I've cloned out my wife and my daughter so much better than this one here, which is correctly exposed, or this one which is exposed for the highlights but lifted up the shadow. So you can see, like, sometimes HDR photography, high dynamic range, can give you a very good shot. So I hope these tips on photographing in harsh light has helped you understand that it doesn't matter what time of the day you go, because when you're traveling, or even sometimes when you go out, you might come across a scene, you go like, I mightn't be back here. I want to take a photo. How am I going to make this photo work when it's midday? Well, this video should have given you some great ideas on dealing with harsh light from the midday sun, or for sunrise or sunset when there's just no clouds about, but you want to take a photo. So thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a big thumbs up. Stay safe, enjoy your photography, no matter what time of the day you take your photos, and I'll see you next time.